All right, so I got just, I guess the slideshow going to kind of highlight mostly, we did this last year, talked a lot about what the Family Forest Network is, kind of how we've got it set up for research and everything else. So kind of got another year under our belt, a whole bunch more time developing our program. I guess kind of further understanding what we're going to actually do for research work, and then finally in the fall of 2023 actually get down to getting at least a little bit of work done. So and that's kind of what I'm going to focus on, or what my slideshow focuses on. But honestly, when I put this together kind of over the last few days, I figured there's probably lots of questions, lots of interest in some of the stuff that we've got going on. So the idea, instead of me just standing here talking the whole time, is we'll just do this as a completely open session. If you've got something that you want to know about and I haven't got to it yet, and you want to yell at me, go ahead and we'll. I said if we talk about a whole bunch of stuff for the next hour and a half, and I don't even get all the way through the slideshow, that's probably a good thing. At least we'll know we've covered the topics of interest. But yeah, so like I'll quickly touch a little bit on some of the challenges that we were up against, but then yeah, mostly kind of a lot of the opportunities, some of the positives, and a bit of the work that we've done, and kind of what's ahead for us too. So I'd say within the room there's a few people that we've got a little bit of work done for already. So other Woodlot owners that we have work upcoming with, and then we've even got Mitch Jameson here at Lamb Teresa, which is one of our contractors, and one of the contractors with the smaller forestry equipment that Andy was talking about, that it seems to be very, very interesting to the small private Woodlot owner crowd. So I'm sure, I don't want to put him on the spot. If you get questions for him once we kind of get to that stuff, we can make him answer a few too if you want. So anyway, so yeah, this is just kind of my agenda. I guess I think I know just about everybody in here, but I'm Ryan with the Family Forest Network. I kind of do the operations coordinator, so I kind of oversee. I got my hand in just about everything that we do with the project. So the intro, I don't know if we need to go over this too much, but basically over the next 4 years, like we've talked about a bunch of times, we're going to do about 150 more harvests on woodlots all through the province. We're trying to quantify the economic and environmental costs and benefits of forestry based on natural disturbance regimes, and develop recommendations for conducting ecologically sensitive management on small woodlands. So like I said, we started operations in the fall of 2023, they're ongoing, and also I think most folks would know, in addition to the FFN funding, we do have a small silviculture budget, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with that today too. So challenges, I feel like I'm kicking the horse has been dead a long time, I'm still kicking it here, but storms and capacity. But honestly, I'll highlight these just for a second as challenges, but really these have turned into opportunities for us. Without the storm, we were kind of going full steam ahead, really diving into wanting to get work done. It's I'm an operational forestry guy. I want to see trees hit the ground and would go roadside and everything else. And without the storm, we probably would have been, several harvests in before we realized that our research design really wasn't that great with a bunch of forest techs and not scientists on board. So it actually ended up buying us time to end up hiring on someone like Kevin Keys, and then eventually Peter Neely also, and I think what we're going to get out of the project in the long term is going to be a lot better than being 20 sites in instead of 5 or 6 right now. So, but anyway, so like we've talked about a bunch of times, Hurricane Fiona created a whole bunch of challenges for the start of our project. I see spelling mistakes already. I wrote this last night, and some of these last night, and I didn't get my wife to check them over for me, so I can't blame this on anybody else. But,
Other than the wife.
yeah, no. So, yeah, so it did create challenges. A lot of the contractors, especially, we had a lot of sites that we thought about. We even had one in Antigonish that we had. It wasn't officially going to be part of the Family Forest Network project, but it was one where we were testing some of these methods, testing our pre-treatment assessment methods, everything else. We've been out for 2 days, done the field work. The contractor showed up for a couple days, did the harvest, and like the day after they pulled out, it was an old field white spruce stand, and literally not a tree was left standing there the day later. So that you know, kind of put the brakes on everything, and then yeah, so contractors were entirely focused on doing salvage work, which they should have been. And you know, for us, we still had sites in other areas that probably we could have tried to get some of this work done, but we really didn't want to take any capacity away from getting work done that's so time sensitive, like the hurricane salvage work. And even today, you know, there's still some contractors that for the last 2 years that's all they've done. They haven't hardly cut a tree off the stump yet. So it's we're starting to come around a little bit. The capacity's coming back some, but we're still, you know, give it the summer. By the end of this summer, especially the softwoods, it's I don't imagine they're going to be worth a whole lot, and whatever we don't get, we don't get. But yeah, so and like I kind of said, there was a whole bunch of other sites we hadn't even been out to see, but you know, woodlot owners that I'd known for a long time, or that were intimately involved with the co-ops, that I think in setting up this project, these were the stands that everyone's like, yeah, like we want to do this, we want to be able to go look at these sites, and then you know, the next look was at a bunch of trees on the ground, so had to kind of regroup that way. So then other emerging challenges, so we have been finding a lot of sites, and I think I have a slide here later on, but we've got, we've had 80 some nominations. About half of those we've approved for the project. We've got 22 sites we've actually done the planning work on. But one of the biggest things we keep running up against with this is that these are fairly low volume stands. Like, you know, we're only looking at 5 or 6 hectares for a lot of our stuff. In a lot of these instances, that might be all the wood that's on the lot, and even under a clear cut scenario, not that big of a volume of wood, hard to justify moving a bunch of big 20-ton machines into to cut wood. And these are machines that, like I've got there, kind of need, you know, at least 500 tons to do the harvest, and a lot of our stuff is all of our work is some type of partial harvest. So you're not even clear cutting. So we're looking at more like 150, 200 tons. Even some that get close to 500, not super appealing to the bigger contractors. Access, another major issue. I don't think that's a big revelation for anyone. We've got you know, lots of woodlots that are part of the farm that in decades gone by, you used to cut your wood in the wintertime. You could plow a road across the farm field and get your wood out that way. You didn't really have a need for an access road or anything, but it's been an awful lot of winters since I would be comfortable taking a tractor trailer across the farm field in the wintertime. Other folks, we had the big rainstorms last year. I actually just helped a whole bunch of people put funding applications in, because we had all kinds of blown out culverts and washed out roads and everything. And so, you know, some small roadwork stuff. I see Jim in the crowd here. We kind of got from that end right up to Jim, who's got a nice woodlot, lots of good work to do, but 2 kilometers of government-owned road that DOT and DNR are fighting over, nobody wants to maintain, so trying to fight against that type of stuff too. But we've been playing nice so far, but the gloves might come off here shortly, because it's an old K-class road and lots of washouts and silt going in brooks and everything else, so we'll figure it out one way or another. But so, and then also contractor training experience. There's lots of contractors out there able to do this work, lots of experience and everything with it, but generally that's the contractors that have been working with the government who've switched over to using the SGM. They've gone through SGM training. They've done more of this partial harvesting type work. Lots of them that are on private land are, you know, a little bit set in their ways, I guess, and then plenty of them are, you know, I've talked to a whole bunch of contractors about doing this stuff, and they said, yeah, if you asked me 10 years ago, probably, but you know, this is my last machine. They've got kids that don't want to work in forestry, they don't want them to work in forestry, and they're just kind of riding out the last couple of years until they're either due for a new machine or they're going to sell and close up shop. And you know, it's a big ask for them to kind of completely shift their entire approach to how they do business. They just want to have a comfortable, or as comfortable a ride as they possibly can for their last few years. So, and then funnily enough, this was I used a template for this slideshow, and this was actually a quote. This was just a generic slide in there, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, that's actually kind of a great quote for as a segue in between our challenges and our opportunities. So I thought it was a good one. So the way to get started is quit talking and start doing, and that's kind of exactly what we did. And it was a good thing because I was starting to pull my hair out of talking about experimental design and everything else. I just wanted to get in the woods and do some work. So our opportunities, the biggest ones, new contractors and smaller equipment. So you can see there, 2 machines. So on top, small 6-ton sandy harvesters. That's actually Mitch's machine. That's for anyone that joined us in Namaw River, which there was over 50 people for that field day a couple months ago. That's the machine that did the harvesting on that site. And then the machine on the bottom, that's actually on a site outside of Eller's house. That was our first FFN site. It's a Rocan and Barrow, not a new machine at all. They were built by, I think they were somewhat tied to Rodney. The Rodney guys sold them back in the 90s, but very small 4-wheel drive harvester. And honestly, neither of these machines are actually new ideas. It's just kind of, as we went big and ultra modern with harvesting, these types of machines, and then also things like hand cutting crews and stuff kind of fell by the wayside. And really what we're doing is kind of resurrecting an old idea where we've got machines of all different sizes, which is, as a land manager, is nice. It's you know, it's hard to build a house with only one tool, and when you've got nothing but big harvesters, that's all you've got. So it's been awesome for me just on a personal level, and like I say, as somebody who helped manage land for a long time, these are the setups that I've been dreaming of, because there's an awful lot of work out there that just we haven't been able to get done because we don't have the right tools for the job. So, like I say, if at any point you get questions, you want to look at the pictures or me to talk about anything, I can jump in again. But, so our first FFN harvest site. So we began on our first 2 sites. They're joint sites, both for the same woodlot owner in Eller's house in the fall of 2023. So Mike Manning with Manning Farm and Forest. Mike's based out of the valley, but serves pretty much all the southern end of the province. He gets up as far as kind of the southern portions of Hants County, lives in the valley, so can service most of that area. Then also has a summer place on the South Shore, and we'll work the South Shore. He's going to do some sites over that way for us in the summertime this year. So, and he's actually got 2 harvesting setups. You see the one on top, that's the small Rocan and Barrow harvester that he used for us, but he's also got a smaller Valtra tractor, which if anyone watched, they were quite popular around these parts in the early mid 90s and stuff, even the early 2000s. So his is in great shape, and we haven't had the chance to work with the tractor yet, but I love that one because it's just a 1-unit harvesting setup. It's got the harvester head on it there, but he usually cuts wood for a week or so, and then switches the harvester head out and can throw a grapple on and do some work. Mike's got quite a bit of his own land, so it mostly stays there, but it's out there as an option for sure. So Mike came to this from, he's not a new contractor per se. For anyone who's been involved in forestry for a long time, Mike's grandfather is Les Corcoran, who's I think in the Forestry Hall of Fame, really well respected in the province. So they've got a bunch of family land that he kind of grew up working on in mostly the Chester area, I guess. So, but yeah, comes at it from a forestry and farming background. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Are you clear cutting there?
No, the picture with the tractor I think is actually along one of Mike's fields. It's just a photo that he sent to me, and then the one on the top is actually the harvest that I'm going to get into. But we don't even use the word clear cut for our project. Basically, I'll dive right into it. But so this site was our first harvest that we did for the project, and I'm actually super happy that it came out this way. It was what we would call in our FEC guides a mixed wood 7, so it's a balsam fir red maple stand, so younger early successional stand, made up, it's around 60% balsam fir. It's kind of a mixed wood, so it goes back and forth, but very heavily dominated by not very good for 50-ish years old, kind of on its way out. Stand was really starting to break up, and we were wanting to get in. The landowner knew that they were going to lose a lot of those fir trees, want to get in, do some harvesting, but really didn't want to do, they own quite a bit of land, pretty heavily focused on ecological forestry, and didn't want to clear cut at all. So so we actually went through, did our pre-treatment assessment work, kind of worked on harvest design. And when you run this stand through the SGM, so SGM is Silviculture Guide for the Ecological Matrix, which is the Crown's template that we use for harvest, it comes out as partial overstory removal with 1/3 retention. And we actually accepted that with very few, we didn't hardly make any changes to the prescription. We allowed for a little bit more retention in spots. We kind of left it more open that in the areas that were very heavy to fir, we cut pretty much all the fir and left the hardwoods. There's portions of this stand though that ended up with quite a bit more than a 1/3 retention. But the idea with it is that whether we were there and harvesting or not, what was going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, most of that fir was going to fall out of that stand either way. So our harvest really mimicked what was going to go on there, but in I guess a little bit more of a controlled manner. There was pockets of nice regeneration and everything coming up through it, and then good, especially red spruce, yellow birch, kind of scattered here and there, intermixed with a lot of the red maple and a little bit of white birch too. So, but why I say I was so happy about this one is this is actually the most aggressive harvest that we would ever do under our project. So 1/3 retention at the minimum is the most that we're going to take out, and it'll really only be in a scenario like this where that was essentially what's going to happen whether we harvest or not. We could have gone through and done more small gaps and everything else, but there was nothing that we could do to make those fir trees stand up for any longer than they already had. They'd reached the point of senescence and they were gone whether we cut them or not. So it became a chance to do some good work, but also capture some economic value for the landowner. So. Yeah, I kind of talked my way through the slide without first getting to it, but so that photo is actually really a representation of what I would say the majority of the stand looks like. There's a few pockets, a little 1/4 of an acre pocket that were almost entirely fir. We actually just cut everything out of it, so we created a few small openings in the stand, but overwhelmingly most of it actually looks quite a bit like this. And it's funny, when we first got started, like I went to anyone that's on the board, like we went to the board meetings, we hosted a field day there, but especially with the board meetings, when you first look at the pictures, it seems really stark, the treatment that we were doing. But and we got a lot of questions, like even at the board level, about is this the right thing to do? And but I think anyone that's been out and been on the site agrees the retention levels are higher than what the photos kind of give it credit for. And I don't know. I just thought it was a great way to start. I mean, it's nice to start in a beautiful tall hardwood stand where you're doing individual tree selection. But that's kind of when we talk a lot about ecological forestry. That's the idea that everyone has. But this is a better way to kind of make it clear that these types of treatments are also really well grounded in ecology and kind of doing the right thing for these stands. Part of what we did do, because it was going to end up as a bigger harvest site, it was 7 or 8 hectares. We picked out a few pieces that were probably not wet enough that we really needed to buffer them, but it was a wet summer. Even in July, August, I think it was August that I was doing the pre-treatment assessment work here. There's still water running everywhere just with the amount that we had. So it was kind of a nice chance to pick out the wetter areas of the block. Know that we wanted to have some skips just to maintain some density. It's good for biodiversity, good to help break up the wind a little bit. And we put a whole bunch of buffers just kind of in through the block to help break it up. But like I said, so the target was really, we got nice fancy names and everything for some of these treatments. For the most part, my direction to the contractors cut the fir and leave everything else. So we did go through. I did quite a bit of tree marking in the stand. Not so much marking what I wanted to cut, but really focused on making it very easy for Mike to be able to see, especially the red spruce, yellow birch. There's some white pine in the stand, but they're big old, like 100-year-old residual ones. There's no way he's gonna, you couldn't miss those. They were all big 2-footers and stuff. So, but yeah, it's a tree mark. We actually found not very many, but a few sugar maples in there. Which I mean, that one's it's hard to tell the difference between sugar maple and red maple. So it's really important to mark them. Not that he was trying to cut them, but even just you know, in falling trees and stuff. When I've got them tagged, he knows to knock them the other way. They're the more important of the trees. So I don't know how clear the photo shows up there, but you can see some white birch, and I didn't actually have a great picture of this. One of the other things that we did, the white birch was fairly limited in the stand, also on its way out. A lot of the small ones were already snags, and there's a whole bunch of really big, like, you know, 60 centimeter, almost 2-foot white birch in there. I mean, they were just big firewood and stuff, and they were starting to show lots of signs of decline, dead tops and everything else in them. So when we were doing our tree marking, we ended up marking a lot of the big white birch with the idea that those were actually going to create the big large snags that you know, things like woodpeckers or any cavity nesters need. And then also there wasn't a lot of big coarse woody material on the ground, so by leaving those white birch, they'll die over the next few years, become snags for a little while, and then eventually fall down and become that big, like I say, the big coarse woody material that we want to see on the ground. So in terms of,
Why do we want to see coarse woody material on the ground?
Why retain the snags?
so snags are important for, especially for wildlife. And like there's some research I was reading. I heard something the other day and then got interested in reading about it. There's some research around, like we talked about in a few stands that we have that we're looking at doing work in, about maybe girdling trees to create snags too. But there's some thought that when you girdle a tree, it tends to die too fast and actually breaks up and it doesn't really rot as it's standing there, versus when they just die naturally. A lot of times when they die naturally, they'll already develop holes and rot and everything else in them. So kind of important to look for opportunities to have big trees like that. And honestly, some of the bigger white birch, I'm pretty confident that they had holes in them anyway. And then around coarse woody material, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to have it. They're great. Like I said, there's some wet spots, a few that don't think were necessarily vernal pools, but in a wet summer like last year, chances are there was some amphibians that could have used it for laying eggs or anything, and like some wildlife adaptations that we think about, especially around vernal pools and stuff, is you think of a salamander. As soon as they hatch, the first thing they do when they come out of the water is look for a huge slash pile or a big rotten log or anything like that. So you know, we want to leave coarse woody material, and especially over 30 centimeters, so essentially over a foot in diameter. That's when they become really important. Like you can look there through the harvesting. There's lots of coarse woody material on the ground, but it's all fairly small, fine stuff. It's going to rot and be gone pretty quick, whereas the large diameter stuff will stay there for a long time. There's also lots of things like saprophytic beetles that like they only live in deadwood. And I mean, they're beetles and bugs. A lot of folks don't tend to think about them, but you know, we're focused on, it's ecological forestry. We're focused on all parts of the forest, and that large coarse woody material is a big part of it. So trying to find ways, whether through this harvest, that we can just naturally leave some big trees there. And there was some big aspen and stuff in this site too. We had the same approach, especially with aspens. You don't want to cut them because they'll sucker back even quicker. So if we can leave them, there'll be some shade to hopefully get the regen of the longer lived species that are more desirable to us. And then eventually, as they fall over, they become that good coarse woody material for the ground too. Short way.
And fertilizer, soil amendment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fertilizer, retention. Like, you know, when you think of a big huge rotten log, you can go to that in the middle of August, even in the middle of a clear cut, and start pulling it apart. Your hands are going to be wet, right? So it's important for all kinds of things. There's, you know, you hear the worry, especially after hurricanes and everything else, about fire, which it can be. Any material on the ground is a bit risky for a little while, but give it a couple of years when it starts to rot, and then it actually works the other way for you, and then it's actually helping to hold moisture on the site too. So yeah. So anyway, for this site, the idea, and I know, shouldn't say I know, you never know for sure, but I've done these types of harvests a whole bunch of times. I didn't call them partial overstory remove or anything else. It just happened to be on. I've done a few for woodlot owners that had a managed plan written by someone else. These types of stands were in as clear cut, and to me, looking at it, it's like, well, why would I cut a bunch of 60-year-old red maple and yellow birch, red spruce that still have for the red maples, maybe 40 years for the red spruce and yellow birch. They got 100+ years left to grow. It doesn't make sense to cut those trees. And on the sites that I've done that, you go back now and they're just an absolute carpet of regeneration. And it's, instead of a clear cut where you have balsam fir red maple coming back again, it's the species that you want to see there. You'll still have balsam fir red maple too, but you have a lot more of what you're hoping to see. And I don't look after this lot, so I don't know what the landowner's goals will be in the future. On this woodlots that I do look after that we've done this, we're basically for follow-up treatments and a wait-and-see approach. Because like I said, it's a fairly open canopy now. We don't want to go in and destroy a bunch of regeneration or anything like that. So probably what we'll end up doing is let the understory come up until at least the point that it's close to being ready for pre-commercial thinning, or hopefully there'll be funding that we can just do that type of work without even having to cut the overstory, and we'll leave it to develop into a 2H stand that we can continue to manage down the road. So the goals for these stands are, I don't know if I have another, yeah, so there's another good representation of what we're doing. You can see the photo on the left. That's what most of the fir look like. That's actually a pile of cut-offs that Mike had just cut for rot and stain and everything else. Probably we were a few years too late for this stand. Like they lost quite a bit of volume just to rot and not having a market for that lower grade wood, but again, as the coarse woody material. And then on the right you can see that's actually like a little bit more dominated by some of the softwoods, but all kinds of nice red spruce. And we know full well, and I made it very clear to the landowner, a lot of those, especially the big spruce that we left as seed trees, they're going to blow down, but just to be able to have those and not have to invest in planting or anything else, and some of them might stand up if come up to Otter Pond sometime and look at, I can never explain why some spruce trees stay standing. You see some of the big huge canopied spruce stuck in the middle of clear cut growing on rocks, and for whatever reason that one tree stays standing. But the idea with this one, like I said, is it'll be hands off for now. You don't have the whole stand blew down in the next couple of years. Maybe they'll want to go back through, but ideally they'll just leave this one. So, and again, the hope is that in the new stand that regenerates, we want to push it to not as a rule, but generally we're trying to push for mixed woods almost all the time. It's there's good research coming from Anthony Taylor and folks like that, just to highlight that mixed wood stands they're more biodiverse, they help store more carbon, and the more species we can have in a stand just makes it more resilient to the seemingly 8 million pests that we have coming after just about every tree. So we want to have as many species there as possible. But the real goal for this stand, and through looking at some of the other stands in the woodlot and everything, had a good sense of where we want to go. The hope would be to regenerate red spruce, yellow birch, which is more characteristic of a good tolerant mixed wood that can grow to a climax or older growth forest. So
We made a decision really early to use the forest ecosystem classification data, which gave us a sense of what the natural progressions of stands would be and what they would ultimately look like if we weren't mucking around in them, to use that data to return places like this where past harvesting had led to conditions that varied from the natural natural successional pathway that it would have been on, to get it back on the pathway. And that became a great phrase because a lot of the folks that were involved in this don't want to say where it's, I don't want to say stupid past where management decisions that didn't really adequately consider the long-term growth of the stand. They don't want to hear that, but successional pathways they see as a beautiful thing. If we can all get on the successional pathway, see, we're all doing fine. So that's the goal here, though. Really, there's a lot of good research, exceptionally good research in Nova Scotia around how do sites grow, develop, die, and we're trying to use that. Now, we don't buy it wholesale. We bring a lot of other considerations, landowner considerations, because we're working for small landowners, and practical experience, and in general, almost 100% of the time, we'll be taking a lighter touch than what's been suggested in the SGEM, But broadly speaking, that's not a bad, the provincial guidelines, the new provincial guidelines for cutting on crown lands are not a bad starting point if you couple them with all of the other ways we have of assessing where forests are and where they might go if we left them alone. So, sorry to interrupt, Ryan.
No, it gives me a quick break. Yeah, like I would say, so far, we haven't designed the treatments for all of our sites, so we're pretty close. Most of what we're doing is fairly grounded in the SGM, just with a lot more adaptations around wildlife, a bit for carbon, biodiversity, things like that. The other thing we've kind of, at least in some sites, moved away from is trying to get away from doing too much of this where you're harvesting across the whole site, because this site is a risk now for wind disturbance. So on stands that are maybe a little bit better composition of species that aren't nearing a biological maturity like the fir was here, focus a lot more on gaps. And honestly, one of the things I would say, so that, this was a 7-hectare site, I think it was. It made good sense to do this type of treatment, but this is one of the more common veg sites that we have, one of the more common stand conditions we have across the province. And there's all kinds of landowners they might have 40, 50, 60 hectares of this. We would never prescribe this treatment on 60 hectares just as a one-time go in and cut it sort of thing. I talked to a few folks who were out looking at this site with me post-harvest, and we kind of all agreed that, especially with the smaller contractors, smaller equipment now, if I was looking after a woodlot with a bunch of this on it, and having the ability to come in and cut 200, 250 tons, as soon as I thought the fir was starting to get to a point that it would support harvesting, we'd actually get in and start to break that stand up. But with the idea that we're going to do it instead of in one harvest or even 2 harvests, in a whole bunch of just repeated small harvests over the next 10 to 15 years until it kind of gets to this point. So basically by the time it's at this point where the fir really doesn't have any more time to live, if we've broken it up a whole bunch, we've already kind of got like a mixture of new age classes in there. We were able to leave it a little bit more intact for longer. It's a little bit less disruptive, and also it doesn't open it up for so much potential wind throw or anything like that. So, but even when we started this one, the idea of the smaller harvesters was something that was kind of out there, but not as we weren't like it's moving really quick with this stuff. Mitch and I only started even talking about doing some of this stuff in December, and we've already got harvest sites done and more planned, and other contractors hopefully on the way. So, Tom?
We talked about leaving the more hardwood tree and more mixed wood situation, and it was Dr. Wilfred Creighton in early 2000 that told this group here that the Germans were stating that the best type of forest was a mixed wood forest. And one thing you can see, the leaf litter on the ground there, that's a really good soil amendment, a good thing for the future.
Yeah, like the leaf litter is, softwoods tend to be fairly acidic, so our soils in Nova Scotia are generally acidic anyway, but yeah, the leaf litter helps to balance that a little bit. It's also an annual input, and then especially with things like, the red maples or most of our hardwoods, they've got deep tap roots and stuff too, so they can bring nutrients up from so much further down than what any of the softwoods do. So yeah, it's like I say, not as a hard and fast rule, but generally we're taking the approach on most woodlots that we want to manage them to some type of mixed wood condition. And mixed wood basically means that you've got at least 25% of both hardwood and softwood. So a mixed wood could still be 25% hardwood and 75 softwood, or vice versa, or somewhere in between there. But it just, our hardwoods tend to be a lot more wind resistant. You do get, like say, the leaf litter. It creates a nice diverse stand. With treatments like this too, I always find it so easy to. I find you get such great regeneration under that kind of filtered light coming through the canopy of your hardwood tree versus leaving the softwoods. So, I don't know. I like them. I think they're the easier stands to work in. Hardwood's never been the biggest driver for us, but you can always get rid of some firewood. That's a pretty consistent market, so it's you're hedging your bets with some of that too. So, and yeah, like I've read a bunch of the reports out of Germany's. you don't know why we can't learn lessons from those folks quicker. They went wholesale on planting softwood and everything, and now they've been working for decades trying to re-diversify their forests, and we're just kind of catching up and following their lead, I guess. So. So then the next site, and this was actually, these stands were essentially adjacent to each other. One was just this red spruce, red maple site was kind of just on the far side of the hill, maybe down a little bit more of a sheltered area. Had been probably harvested a lot longer before. And I should say that balsam fir stand, it was a result of through talking to the landowner, it had been clear cut. I think it was like 65, 70 years prior. He couldn't remember on this one, which makes sense, but probably this site actually could have been the same thing, like one of those balsam fir red maple stands that either probably fell down on itself, or maybe had a little bit more red spruce in it anyway, but and then grew up as a red spruce red maple stand, which we would have as a mixed wood too. So very similar stand condition, more of a mid-successional one where you've got a lot higher component of red spruce, which is a climax species, and then the red maple, but still very, very similar in that there's some yellow birch, still some really, really big white birch in there that's starting to die off, and then the odd sugar maple and stuff like that here and there. Especially if you get around any of the seeps, you'd start to find ferns like Christmas fern and stuff that tend to make you think it's a little bit richer, but overall very, very similar stand base. So the idea with this stand is that while there is still some fir in it, we've kind of lost that, I wouldn't call it risk, but like there's not the urgency where we have one age class of trees that's really starting to fall out of the entire stand. They lose a little bit of fir here and there, but it was a more minor component of the stand. But like I said, still a bit of a mid-succession one. We're trying to keep it as a mixed wood, but transition more from that red spruce red maple to more of a red spruce yellow birch again. And by the way to do that, both through the SGM and then also just through our own discussions, was to use what we call an irregular gap shelter wood. And when you put it through the SGM, it comes out as a medium retention, which is essentially 50% removal. So that feels really aggressive, and even saw some of the 50% rules they did as like when they trialed this on Crown Land, a bunch of even the gaps blew over in the hurricane. So we took it as, instead of a medium, high retention is more like in the 30% realm. We said, well, we're going to stay somewhere kind of in between that 30 and 40% range. So kind of a mixture between medium and high. Once we get in there, put a bunch of gaps in, and then took some stuff out for wet areas and stuff, we were probably not quite 40%, I think, is what we ended up in for gaps.
So you left just so that people are clear about what the lead was. What was the lead percentage across the treatment area?
So by area, a little over 60% of the stand is left completely untouched. And then also within our gaps, you keep several what we would call like permanent retention trees. They're just legacy trees. They're there to be seed trees. They're trees that are going to grow old, and like we're on Crown land where it's actually regulated, they would grow old and never be harvested. On private, it just depends on who the landowner is. But in our design, in what we communicate to the landowner, the idea is to leave them and let them fall down. And ideally, as some of your permanent retention trees fall down, the next time you come through and harvest, you replace them with a different tree. So.
And so the earlier Mike Manning's first job was 35% retention, and so this was 60 plus.
Yeah. Mike's was 1/3, so 33% retention.
Yep.
Really, probably ended up closer to 40% retention in that one, where this one's 60 plus percent.
And you would think this would be more typical of the conditions we're going to encounter and how we might approach them.
Yeah, so these are regular shelter woods, especially the irregular gaps are probably going to be at the end of the project. They'll be one of, if not the most common treatment that we've used in a lot of stand types. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, like I say, around when you leave a whole bunch of the stand completely intact, it's still fairly dense. You're leaving a good shield against wind and everything. but also operationally, these for the contractor, because we go through, we mark all the trails, mark the buffer of all their gaps, mark all the trees we want them to leave in them. So all they're doing, they're just driving along, cutting their trails, they get to a gap and they cut all the trees that don't have paint on them. So it's just little mini clear cuts for them essentially, and it takes the whole idea of them having to pick which trees to choose and like to choose to cut or leave or anything like that. Made it a lot easier, and we actually did a few, I think Mitch, I did it on yours too, I left one gap where I didn't actually mark the trees, and didn't ask you, I didn't get your opinion on it, but I know for Mike I did the same thing, he's like, no, just mark them, it's easier, it's, you can just kind of shut your,
Ryan, do me one favor though, when you start to talk about clear cutting, of course, folks can get confused. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're used to really large clear cuts, so describe the average opening size here and also describe some of your mini gaps, right, and what your thinking is about it.
yeah, and I'll have some on those too.
Okay, good.
I just
should shut up.
I just call it clear cut in that you get into a little ribboned area and you cut all the trees that aren't marked to be kept. So it just becomes easier. It's a big time skill to be able to take a big machine like that and walk through and say, okay, well I'm gonna cut this tree, not that one. You know, I do some of this stuff for fun on my own with a chainsaw where I can stand and look up at every tree and you know, so I'll stand there for 5 minutes sometimes trying to decide back and forth between each tree. And by me or whoever marks these sites out, if I'm doing that with a paint gun instead of the guy or the person in the seat of the harvester, it's actually making them more efficient that they don't have to think about that because I've already made those decisions for them. And it's so much easier to make that decision with your boots on the ground. But yeah, so like I call them mini clear cuts. The biggest gap that we would possibly have is 0.2 hectares, which is not a whole lot bigger than this room, a little bit bigger, but trying to regenerate, especially for our hardwoods, back to more yellow birch. Yellow birch is it's a shade tolerant tree, but it's only mid tolerant. It actually needs a little bit of light. If you left it fairly tight, we get lots of red spruce in there, no problem, balsam fir, but the yellow birch, oaks, pine, and there is a little bit of pine in this site too. They tend to like a little bit more light than what say red spruce, sugar maple, hemlock, anything like that actually wants. So trying to open them up a little bit more for that, but with the idea, I think a few of the hardwoods there are actually, maybe not, there's a few aspens in the site too, so it's a really big balancing act to try not to open it up so much that you get a lot of early successional trees like aspens or birches, or like, well, I should say birch, but white birch or anything like that, but open enough that we can get the yellow birches. So really interested to watch this site as it develops. One of the big challenges with using the small gear, and I don't have a picture of Mike's forwarder, but it's a conventional Rodney forwarder, but it's only a 9-ton machine. It's actually it's on the smallest end of conventional harvesting equipment that you would see, and he's a very careful operator. Did a really good job. At first, too good of a job, spending too much time brushing trails. But with small gear like that, we got no soil disturbance on these sites. And yellow birch have just the tiniest little seed, and they need actual mineral soil exposure to be able to effectively seed in. And it's kind of one of the challenges that we have. So probably not. We'll leave it next summer, and then the summer after that, towards the end of that year, we'll go back and do some regen assessments on these sites to see if we're actually successful. One of the things I don't think we're going to have is very much yellow birch regeneration, just because we were too careful. We did too good of a job of protecting the soil in there, and don't actually get that mineral soil exposure. So it's a challenge, something we're thinking about. Like, is there ways that we can come up with modified ways of doing the harvesting? Or Mike's forwarder has a little kind of blade on it. Could we actually scuff a bit of the ground off to get that exposure, or do we need to say just to heck with it, and we're going to go through and actually plant yellow birch, like even next summer? If we don't think we're going to get the regeneration, we'll just go through and artificially do it. And luckily for that one, we're going to be involved with Thriving Forest, which is the Nova Scotia version of 2 Billion Trees program. So we're undecided on that one yet. Probably at some point this year, we'll go out and actually look at the ground conditions again. Now it's ahead of winter and everything, and kind of make that decision. So in the future, I think it'd be great to have someone actually do some minor site prep on a few of these sites. You see, so Bob Seymour out of Maine, he's had a big influence on the AGM, and you know, with other folks out of that area, they've been doing these types of treatments for a long time. I've seen some of his videos that he actually just uses an old 440 John Deere cable skidder and drags a big old pine top around. It's just enough to expose a little bit of soil, but a cheap way to do site prep is that maybe something that we should be thinking about. But anyway. So then the other big one for us this winter is hemlock dominated stands. And these are ones that, like, through talking with a lot of woodlot owners and everything else, weren't necessarily top of mind. Like, you look at that stand that's on actually where we had the field day in Namaw River, that's a different stand but on the same woodlot. You know, beautiful piece of wood. Even when I started working with Lloyd, the landowner, he's not even thinking about harvesting down in here. It's a nice old stand, not old growth yet, but 100-year-old and no big risk. But now that we've got hemlock woolly adelgid, you start to worry and think, you know, what's going to happen with these stands, and is there something that we can do? I know there's chemical control and everything else, but especially for the folks outside of the infested area right now, is there things that we could be doing to get these stands ready, even before we have to think about using pesticides or anything like that? So what we ended up coming up with is that we wanted to look, at first we started with just stands like the one you see in the photo, which would be an SH1, so just a hemlock dominated stand. It's got nothing but needle carpet underneath, just as dark as can be, but have since expanded it to basically say any stand that's hemlock dominant, so over 50% hemlock in the overstory. We want to work in those stands and see what we can come up with, and we're focusing on trying to find stands sort of across the province. So we've actually got one in the kind of Tupper Lake area down towards Kedgie, so a stand that it's just recently infected, or at least to the landowner's knowledge. We were the first ones to find HWA in that site. We did the one in Namaw River this winter with Mitch. That's one that don't think there's HWA there yet, but it's in the southern Hants County. It's not too far away. And then we've got a couple one in Cumberland, one in Pictou, and ideally we'll find one maybe towards Antigonish. I don't know if we'll find any in Cape Breton or not, but kind of go as far north as we can, just to give us a chance to look at same or very similar treatments at different stages of being infested. But for anyone that went to the Woodlot conferences, you know, they even picked up, they haven't detected HWA, but they picked up through environmental DNA sampling, found it even in Victoria Park and Truro. So who knows, even these ones that we looked at could have a minor infestation that we just don't know about. The big thing with HWA is it tends to start at the top of the tree, filters down through. By the time you're walking on the ground and finding it on the lower branches, you probably get a pretty good infestation going on there. So, but we mentioned a little bit around the regular gap shelter woods. That's the whole idea with these stands. Is very minimally, like these ones are basically a maximum of a third in gaps. Is kind of what we're targeting. In the mixed wood stands, we can be a little bit more aggressive because we do have the hardwoods there. They're a little bit more wind firm. But especially in the hemlock dominant stands, we just want to try and break them up enough, knowing full well that the bug's going to get there, the landowner's going to lose a lot of trees eventually. But if we can break this stand up, you know, we've got one in Cumberland County that looks identical to that photo, and we're hoping to do the harvest this summer. And the idea would be that hopefully they've got 10, 15 years before an infestation even starts, and by that time, all of our gaps will actually have some nice regeneration in there. We may actually be ready to go back and do another harvest where we can expand our gaps, put a few new gaps in, and if they're losing a few trees here and there, we'll do a bit of a sanitation harvest where we can cut the worst ones out. And then also at the same time, we're trying to pick good, really healthy hemlocks to leave in those gaps, with the idea that when the infestation does eventually come, those are the trees that if the landowner wants to spend the money, those are the ones that we would go and actually do the injections or do the basal bark spray and protect. So then you see a couple of photos from the site that we did this winter with Mitch. One of the first things I put on there, the gaps were left messy. If you were there for the field day, we talked a bunch. I had to beat the arborist out of Mitch there for a little while. They like some nice and clean and chipped and everything. But we're so focused on NDR, it's a natural disturbance regime. We want to, when we do a harvest, we really like what we're recreating here is essentially a windstorm that came through and knocked down pockets of hemlock here, there, and everywhere. and when a windstorm knocks down trees, it doesn't limb them all and cut all the brush down to ankle height and make it look nice and pretty for you. It leaves it as a big mess like this. But that's actually important because that's how we get those nice big brush piles that, lots of ground nesting birds, small mammals, anything like that will use them. Also good research out of places like Vermont and stuff where they're really focused on regrowing tolerant hardwoods. By leaving big ugly tops like this, they become almost natural deer fence. So you can imagine as those tops slowly start to break down, maybe you get in here, same thing, trying to get a lot of yellow birch back. There's all kinds of red maple on the site too, and if they happen to regenerate inside that top, deer are lazy and there's lots of food on that site. They're going to pick off the easy ones, chew the buds off them, and hopefully we'll have some at least survive in the messier spots. I tease about Mitch. I had a hard time with this too first. Like, it's messy looking. It's when I first started cutting with a chainsaw, like you'd be spending a day back and paid nothing to go through and rework your spots and have to clean those up. But it's better for, it's more natural. It's better for ecology, and at the same time, that any top there that you see that was unprocessed is a top that any harvesting contractor didn't have to spend time limbing it, doing all that type of work that's completely unproductive, and they wouldn't get paid for it if they were working by the ton. So it's actually better for productivity and everything too there. So, and then the photo on the bottom, it's not the most clear thing to see, but that's in another gap. And you can see we left a few nice big hemlocks. They're kind of ugly from a wanting to grow sawlog perspective. The one on the left there is fairly crooked. The one on the right's got double tops and everything. But health-wise, big, beautiful live crown, nice thick crown, really healthy looking trees. And for us, where we're focused on protecting good, healthy hemlocks, those should be great seed producers. And with a big, huge crown, it's just going to take that many more years or that many more bugs to actually infest that tree and kill it. So it's got a good chance that it'll hang on. And then if, like I say, if we do go through and inject them, it's a chance that they might survive and last long enough that we can hopefully actually get our biological control. But that's decades down the road before we really get there. So there you can see. So this is an actual block map that we came up with. Don't make fun of me because it's ugly. I can do the GIS work, but I do not make pretty maps. That's what we've got Evan, our new GIS guy, for. So anyone else that's working with us going forward will have a lot better looking map than these ones. So you can see the big red area there. So that's our control area. So no harvesting at all. It's flagged out. We left that, to be a landowner in our project. That's one of the requirements we have. It's not a legal requirement. We didn't put it in the contract or anything. If next year a windstorm comes down and knocks that over, Lloyd can come back to us and say, look, I want to salvage it. We may want to go through and take some measurements, but we're not going to say, nope, that's part of our research work. You can't go clean up your woodlot or anything. So, but you can see within all the green spots there, so that's our gaps. So that's where we would have done most of the harvesting, keep some trees. And then that big orange blob is actually a small pocket within that stand that, through doing our pre-treatment assessment sampling, ended up kind of noisy, but actually a lot more towards that first balsam fir red maple mixed with a stand that we had. So that actually got the same treatment. So just a 0.7 hectare partial overstory removal. I wish we were there today to take you out and walk you through why I like working with the small equipment so much. Especially Mitch and the harvester, but also the guys in the forwarder. Because it's small equipment, they were able to go through and really snake their way around in there. And there's all kinds of really nice, 4 or 5 meter tall red spruce, all kind of pole staged yellow birch that they could actually, if they were 3.5 meters apart, with his small equipment, he was able to sneak right in between them, not taking any tree out. It didn't matter if you had the best harvester operator in the world, if he was in a Ponzi Ergo or something of that size, a conventional type gear, there's no way he could have saved both of those trees, and through no fault of their own. It's just the size of the equipment. So it was, it really highlights the benefit of being able to work with that smaller equipment. So and that's just a few more photos. So bottom right, that's the site that we've got in the west. That's Kyle and I out there, looking like a couple drowned rats, to be honest with you. It was 2 degrees and pouring rain and blowing 70 kilometers an hour that day. Not the best day to be out in the woods, but still better than being in the office. The tree on the left is again from Lloyd's. We didn't get down there on the field day, but that's actually one of the big things that I like to highlight with our projects, we have a whole bunch of measures. Like before, when you did pre-treatment assessment stuff on Crown land, you just walk point to point, and you almost put your blinders on. Like you're just getting your measures in between. But we've got it. If anybody wants to see it, I've got my iPad here somewhere. I can show you afterwards. We have a whole bunch of other forms that we can fill out for wildlife, species of risk, if we found invasive species, or what we call ecological growing stock trees. We measure those in our plots for our pre-treatment assessment. But this is a big, fairly healthy American beech tree, which is super uncommon, really rare in the stand. This one fell just outside of one of the gaps. But I was able to, as I walked through, take what we call like an EGS tree point, and mark it, and that's just my way to know where there's all kinds of different, whether it was a tree like this, it's a little bit rare, it's a good mass tree, and uncommon to find one this healthy. But you know, if I found a big oak tree on this site, not that oaks are uncommon in Nova Scotia, but they're uncommon for that stand, and want to make sure I protect it, because red oak especially is something that we want to grow back. So yeah, I won't go all the way into all the forms that we have, but we do have a lot of forms to look at that type of stuff, water features, all kinds of things. So, and then the picture on the top right, you know, we discussed already about coarse woody material. That's something that we've started doing on some of these, especially the high retention irregular shelter woods. They're still a little bit cookie cutter for me, where you know we kind of have all sort of the same gap size and stuff, but because we've taken our removal levels so far down, we've started to try and create what we're calling micro gaps too. So looking for an opportunity to maybe take just 2 or 3 big trees here and there for different reasons, whether I mean, some of them we cut them because they're big, beautiful trees and great saw logs, and we want to generate some income for the landowner. Other times, and especially in this case, that picture doesn't highlight it very well, but we were cutting a few big hemlocks there, and there was some really nice red spruce regeneration right around it. And knowing that we're trying to transition away from hemlocks, is a chance to cut a couple trees, release the red spruce at the same time. And you can see the one tree in the front there is marked as CWM, so that was one that we actually would go back through and fell post-harvest. And that's a tree that, as much as possible, is just cut it and leave it. Don't touch it. It becomes part of that. Trying to recreate essentially a big hemlock tree just fell over. The only thing we don't get is where it actually uproots. You get that nice soil mixing and everything, but at the very least, it's going to be just a big tree that tipped over in the woods and left. So.
Ryan,
Yeah.
would you girdle a tree like that in that for those circumstances at all, or do you just cut it and direct it slow?
For that one, we weren't. There was enough snags in this stand. Again, this is another stand that had a bunch of big white birch in it, so there was actually some pretty good snags in that stand. So we were more looking at making a little bit of coarse woody material. Really specific for this one, it was almost always doing it in a spot where we could cut a big hemlock and release a nice young red spruce or yellow birch. In other sites though, like in maybe some of the aspen sites that we have that are younger trees, maybe don't have hardly any snags, we'll probably look at doing a little bit of girdling. But like I said, you're way better off to try and find trees that are almost there anyway, and just leave them and let them die in their own, because they tend to break up in a better manner. So. But we could do some girdling. I mean, if you've been to Pat's place, you've girdled all kinds of trees out there, and I think with pretty good success. There, sometimes you got to do it again and again, even to kill them. But
Eventually you get them.
yeah, for sure. So then finally, silviculture, and so kind of right around. Andy can tell you the timeline better than I could, but around the same time that the FFN started to become a thing, I remember one day getting a an urgent phone call from Andy. He said, "I got questions," and he said, "and I have to ask you tonight." So I called him back. He said, "DNR told us they'd give us $500,000 for a silviculture project, but I have 2 days to write the proposal. I need some answers." So gave him a few ideas on some stuff that they could do, and never really heard anything else about it. And then fast forward a year and a half, and got hired in my current role, and lo and behold, the project that Andy and a few folks dreamed up in pretty much no time it came to reality. So we've got about $500,000 to look at some different silviculture, like currently unfunded silviculture options. So our main focus so far has been what we've coined restoration thinning. And essentially, at first, what that was, we were calling it tall PCT, too tall PCT. Basically stands that miss that window, so 2 to 7 meters for softwoods, 3 to 9 or 6 to 9 meters for hardwoods. Stands that were a little bit too tall, but really would still benefit from having some work done. And if you've ever been around me in the woods, that's one of the things I'll complain about until I'm blue in the face, that our standards are almost more of a hindrance sometimes. You don't actually get to put your hat on as a forestry professional and say, yeah, like this site should qualify for some work, just because this one-page sheet of paper says, no, it's too tall, I can't do anything. So it's given us a chance to actually look at some of these sites and trial some thinning work on them, without having to worry that, you know, somebody from DNR is going to show up and fail the site and we're going to pay the money back for it. So that's been the main focus. Now we changed the restoration thinning just to highlight the fact that it's so much less of trying to get a perfect density, you know, a tree every 8 or 10 feet or whatever it is. Way more focused on releasing good crop trees and affecting the species composition of the stand, while still doing some density control and trying to turn it into a stand that might be harvestable in a shorter time period. But the big focus is on the crop trees. We're also going to look at understory thinning. There's all kinds of sites out there with, you know, especially think of some of the intolerant hardwood sites like aspen stands, red maple stands, that naturally will eventually go through kind of a successional pathway back to something better, and lots of times they may actually have, you know, tolerant hardwoods, red spruces, anything like that growing in the understory, and especially think about aspens. They're not worth anything to cut, and sometimes maybe the best thing to do is let them grow up and die and fall down. But if we could go through and work in the understory, you're almost influencing the next generation. And then the other idea with the understory thinning is, as we switch away from clear cutting and do a lot more partial harvesting, you're creating a lot of light conditions where we're going to have so much regeneration in the understory, and how are we going to deal with that? And that's not something that I think is talked about enough, or it hasn't been thought about enough yet. So it's you know, we don't have enough money to do it as a big full research project, but we're definitely poking at it some and looking at ideas to, at least when everyone else catches up on the thinking around that, we'll have at least a bit of data that we can share with them. So. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we're also working with Thriving Forest to do some planting, for the most part specific to our FFN harvest sites, but hoping to figure out a way that maybe, you know, there's lots of folks out there that had salvage work that maybe don't qualify for the FFN now, but if we can figure out a way to bring them kind of under our wing and get in on the project, we'll definitely entertain that too. But we'll. I would say the understory thinning and then the planting is something that we'll flesh out a whole bunch more over the coming months and have more information coming on that. Yeah, just to highlight Mitch again, this is the exact same carry that he's got. So it's a shear head, it's got mechanical shears on the bottom and then accumulators on the top that you can do, yeah, essentially kind of like pre-commercial thinning, you know, that you would have run around with a brush saw to do in the past, but doing it from the, a little more luxurious. You can do it from the seat of a machine, and when it's 30 degrees, you get nice cold AC blowing down your back, and when there's 2 feet of snow in the woods and it's freezing cold, you get heat, and you can still go at it, and you can see the lights on there. You can start kind of whatever time you need to, and it's you know, I when I first started thinking about this stuff, I wouldn't say I was against it, but apprehensive. I spent the bulk of my career has been running around with a brush saw strapped to my back too, so I have a little bit of fondness for that type of stuff, but you know, just with the results that we get with this, and then also with knowing the problems that we have with workforce, and you know, this is a safer way to do the work. It's I think for me at least, one of the big attractions is something that you can put a person in the seat of that machine, and as long as the funding comes and the work is there, it's not a seasonal job. They can work year round doing this type of work, which is I think one of the challenges that's plagued silviculture for so long. It's too hard to make a full year's pay on 8 months of work where you're basically just growing your body. You need that 4 months off in the wintertime just to rest and recuperate, really. So yeah, like I said, the main focus is releasing crop trees of desirable species, create a stand that ideally in the future we'll actually be able to do some harvesting work in. And we're not completely going away from using manual crews. The first few sites that we did with this one with Greg in North Nova, we're using his manual crews, and I think you know, there's positive and negatives both ways. Honestly, and because I've done a little bit of this sitting in one of these machines, I really think the best way, and something that we're looking for the right site to trial this on, is to actually combine the two. Work through with the mechanical machine to kind of cut your trails, deal with the worst of all the junk, but then when you get to a spot that's a little bit finicky, you know, trees growing really tight together, or especially with the machine like that, if you get into really dense softwood, it's hard to get the head in there without doing some damage to your crop trees, and leave those for somebody with a saw. And I think once we trial it, as long as we can figure out the right way to approach to attack it, I think that's probably gonna be the best of both worlds. So yeah, it's just some photos. The machine on the left's actually one I spent a few hours sitting in, but I'm not much of a machine operator. I could throw the tracks off that machine just looking at it right here, I think, so I get pretty bored, but after about 3 or 4 hours anyway, I want to get out and run the saw. So, but yeah, that's actually Jason King's machine, or old machine that he had with Elmsdale Lumber. And then picture on the right is the first of the restoration thinning projects that Mitch did for us this winter, on a site in, actually the site that we saw on the field day in Hants County there. And I just took that photo just to show, like, you can obviously tell that site has been thinned. You know, the two bigger trees you can kind of see right in front of you, really nice red spruce crop trees. Those are the ones I was actually worried about the least, because they were kind of up in the mature canopy, but it doesn't come through very well on the screen. There's more red spruce in the background, but you can see it's not completely thinned out. We took an approach where if we had a pocket with a lot of really good crop trees, we're going to spend the time and thin really hard. But in a spot like that, you're actually kind of looking down the trail. It's just to the left of that one bigger red spruce. And then it was a lot of balsam fir, gray birch, everything else. We just kind of worked our way through that. You kind of put lipstick on a pig to thin that, to be honest with you. Like you're not gonna, there's no good species there that we're looking for. You're not gonna get a big growth response out of it. So more of a like really mixed density sort of thinning, and I was really, really happy with the results there. And the other thing I wanted to point out with that site is that we started that in December before we got a good freeze up. I think it rained almost every day that they were there. And especially the day I got Kevin out to go walk through that, Kevin Keys, you know, Kevin's soil scientist, he was worried about even with a 6-ton machine being in there and walking around, but we stomped all over that place, and even in spots where we crossed little wet runs and everything else. And you'd have to look some hard to find a track anywhere, even with, you know, 6-ton machines, steel tracks and everything. And that goes the same for the harvester, same size machine. And even, you know, I know a few folks with a little bit bigger harvester, but at a certain point, like, you know, that under 10-ton machine, it's just not the same as having something that's 20, 25 tons. You just don't get the ground disturbance. And that kind of bore itself out. You know, another friend that has one that's running, he never shut down the spring. Like, with his harvesting equipment, he had a bigger forwarder for a little while. I had to stop that because he was making sprouts. But with the harvester and then with his new small forwarder, they couldn't be on like a wet clay soil, but as long as they stayed on something reasonably well drained, they just worked right through and kept going at it.
I just comment at the 9 Mile site, one of the trails that was cut. What struck me was that the trees on either side, the tops were close enough together.
Oh yeah.
That when you were standing up, you wouldn't have known you were on a trail, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just that smaller machine and what that means for what you leave behind, not just in terms of ground disturbance, but your retention and keeping things tight where you want.
Yeah, in trees this size, like if you were thinking about a uniform thinning type treatment, you're thinking probably at least 3 meters in between the trees. And Mitch, do you know the exact? You'd be under 2 meters, I think, to the outside of the tracks probably on those smaller machines. Yeah. So like you're essentially doing an in-stand thinning. You're not actually taking anything out productivity wise. So with the tractor for this with silviculture work, but then also on the, you know, I think you had a plantation that you were starting to talk about commercial thinning or anything. Well, and I've supervised thousands of hectares of that, and that was one of the biggest things that I constantly chased contractors on, is having too wide trails, or your trail spacing isn't wide enough apart. And what ends up happening is our goal is always to stay under 20% of removal of the entire site into trails, whereas if you go through for your first thinning on these sites, it's a little bit more expensive to use the smaller machines. You know, they don't run a tree through as fast, but it's not that much more expensive. and you're really not losing that 20%. It's an instant thinning. You're not taking any ground out of production to do your first thinning. So, you know, we have to wait. It's going to take a long time to actually see how it pans out. But I mean, this is the approach that they, you know, we've taken a lot of our silviculture methods from the Scandinavian countries, but we didn't adopt everything. They've used smaller equipment like this for that reason for a long time. So, yeah, I think in the long run, by not losing out on that 20% of growing stock in future harvests, you would more than make your money back over the long run. So, I think I have one more. That was one more picture. This is I think one of the biggest successes we've had so far with the FFN, especially with the silviculture crew. Is this is from what, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. We were down to see Matt at the community forest. They were able to steal Mitch away from us for a little bit, and
Won't be the last time either.
No, look, I'm in Boston last time. Matt keeps trying to take contractors away, and I know the the Western Woodlot group was trying to call Mitch yesterday, wanting to take him down there. So I'm gonna have to start fighting friends here at some point. They're trying to take all my contractors, but you know, this is basically the exact same treatment. Matt, I don't think you guys changed anything from what we had
User
first come
spec
up with.
completely, yeah.
So they took it over and completely applied it on crown land, and from the sounds of it, I think the crown guys are pretty happy with what went on, and maybe trying to find opportunities to do a bit more. So just to say that it's not a fully funded activity yet. It's not something that you know, we could apply everywhere, but the interest is definitely there, and I think you know, especially even not on the day, especially from the, you know, guys like Matt and myself who are mid-career, like from those on down, really see the value in this stuff, and like just the idea around doing this type of work, you know, from talking with especially the techs and stuff on site there. There's a ton of interest, and I think you're going to see it go eventually. It's just
Yeah, Ryan, I would share, like, the feedback's really positive, and I think it's two things. It's the use of the equipment and the way that solves a problem, but it's also the prescription that you guys have developed and how applicable that is as well. So yeah, like, great buzz happening as a result of this, for sure.
Yeah, and I won't take all the credit for this one. It was a kind of a combination between myself, Kevin Keys, and then Patricia Miro with the Western Woodlot group. Oh geez, we had meeting after meeting and hundreds of pages of emails and everything back and forth. But it was, you know, we had a steering committee on the site in Alma River, and then you know, Matt was up to check it out, and then we've been down to look at his, and you know, you're a bit nervous to come up with kind of your own treatment and stuff, and how's it going to turn out. And I think you know, even on I probably drove Phil a little bit crazy in Alma River because I stopped in to see him every day and we're talking about it and stuff. But I think there's little things that probably would change, but it's so far it's gone better than what I thought it would on these sites, and you can just really see from seeing what the stand was before to what it is now that we're going to have a big effect on them. So, and you know, the restoration angle is that if these stands were left, I mean, my favorite thing to say is they might as well have been cornfields. They're not growing a forest, they're not growing harvestable trees or anything else either. So, and then just this is my last slide there. So if you get questions, get them. So just some upcoming projects. So we've got trials of some other new treatments for different stands that we're going to get into this year. Like I mentioned before, I find saying either we're going to do continuous cover, a regular shelter woods, or we're going to do a thinning, or we're going to do a regular gaps to still be a little bit cookie cutter. So we're taking a new treatment, or I'll call it a new treatment. It's actually one that they've been trialing again some places in the States, a little bit in Vermont, and those places, of using a variable density thinning. So the idea of that is you actually do some portions of your stand as a thinning. You're going to leave some as complete skips, not do any type of treatment, but then also do some gaps in them too. And I think that probably is one that is going to take us a lot more time to figure out the planning of it, but will best mimic natural disturbance. Because I mean, if anyone's been around and looked at the Fiona damage or all the different hurricanes, that's kind of what happens. You can have some bigger gaps, some smaller gaps, lose a few trees here and there, have portions that really didn't have any damage at all. So yeah, looking forward to trying a few of those. We're also whole crew of us are in early June in a tree marking course. Tree marking something that's not been done a whole lot in Nova Scotia, but it's an an actual regulated thing in Ontario. So through the partnership with NSCC and then MJ at the Community Forest, they're putting on the they've adapted the Ontario Tree Marking Guide for Nova Scotia. So we're going to be the guinea pigs and go through that one first. And I've already got at least 4 nice taller hardwood sites to go through and try some of that stuff out. We've got at least one new contractor for sure, just approved for new harvesters. We're gonna have some more contractors starting. Highlight on that one, if anybody knows any contractors, especially, we've got a few in central, kind of the valley area, but if you know somebody young that's maybe already doing a little bit of this stuff or thinking about this type of work that it was from, say, South Shore, or especially, towards eastern end of the mainland or Cape Breton especially, we're looking for contractors, and we're more than willing to support them with, trying to guarantee them as best we can some harvesting sites with us, especially if they're focused on smaller gear and really doing this type of work. We want to have good research, we want to have good everything else, but if the biggest thing that comes out of this is we're able to help start 5 or 6 new contractors that just want to focus on this type of work, and especially focus on working with small private landowners, it's money well spent no matter what the rest of the outcomes are. So yeah, always on the hunt for those. We got a few folks to talk to. Probably gonna have some liming trials. So looking at specifically sugar maple stands, becoming pretty obvious. At least in some areas, it's tough to get good sugar maple regeneration. Not hard to get little seedlings, like nice short little ones, but to actually have them grow up to the pole size is. I hadn't even thought about it until after working with Kevin. He mentioned it and walking through a bunch of sites, and all of a sudden, yeah, he is right. I didn't think about that, but thinking maybe soil might be at least a part of that factor. Sugar maple is one of the most demanding trees we had, especially on calcium and stuff, and liming can help with those. And then also we just added, they call it TH5 stand, which is a beech-dominated stands. And there's some research that Kevin and I think Kyle have been looking at, that if you actually lime those sites prior to harvest, that can actually improve the soil, make it less favorable for beech regeneration and more favorable to try and get the sugar maple or even yellow birch back. So looking and thinking about some opportunities for that. And then the biggest one on the radar for us right now is around best management practices for nesting birds in the singing season. So this was a question I think at the AGM last year. We're not going to do a blanket singing season for our project. It's tough. It's probably not realistic to say that you can shut the entire industry down for most of the summer, especially knowing that we don't have good harvesting conditions in the winter, and folks have just come back from shut down for spring wet season too. But there is a Migratory Bird Conservation Act that we do have to follow, and that we haven't followed at all. I think all of us are guilty of this in forestry. So our approach is kind of two-pronged. We're trying to figure out ways to say what stands should we know that we're going to avoid during bird nesting season. So older, quite diverse, multi-age, multi-canopied stands. Pretty easy to say that those shouldn't be touched. Or even a stand, it might be an old field white spruce stand, but it's growing right next to a nice wetland or any type of water course or anything. Probably avoid those. But can we work in somewhat simplified stands that aren't close to any major features like that? And then also, how do we go about actually doing the monitoring both pre and during harvest? So both myself and then Maggie and Kyle just recently went through an avian nest suite course, doing a bunch of literature review, and then we're going to work with the folks at MTRI and also Cindy Stacer on coming up with some sort of BMP. What we come up with for this year, I can guarantee you won't be the same as next year. It's going to be a bit of a working document and keep working at it. But so just trying to figure out how to pick sites, how to train harvest contractors to know what to watch for, what's going to happen if we did find a bird nest during a harvest. So I think it's going to be harder than even I think right now to actually find good harvest sites during this time of year, but we're going to try and either prove that we can do it, or who knows, we might prove that maybe we actually should be not doing very much harvesting during that time of year. But like I said, there's actual legal requirement that we do that stuff. one thing I can tell you for sure that we know that we're gonna do is only focus on the irregular gap shelter woods, cause like we said, 60% at least of those stands is completely untouched. We're not picking through, we're not doing any harvesting of those, so any bird that happens to be nesting in that portion of the stand, there'll be some disruption around noise and everything, and then it just becomes what species of birds, like an American robin that nests under my deck every year, and it doesn't care that I mow the lawn right underneath it or anything, it just sits there and looks at you. So there's some birds that are not very sensitive to that type of stuff, others that, the first second they hear a tree fall or hear a harvester running or anything like that, they might be gone. So what to do around that, and we know that we don't have the answers now, but we need to figure it out. So we're kind of taking the first step to actually go down that road. So outside of that was all I had. Still one more picture from Mitch. That's actually just around the hemlock stuff. That's actually work that they were doing in Kedgey Park. If you happen to see any of the stuff from there, another time Matt was able to steal one of my contractors. But pretty cool work down there. So
Is that HWA hemlock?
yeah, that'd be part of the kind of adaptive silviculture, trying to get it was in Jeremy's Bay, right? Like in the campground, trying to get it ready for doing. I think they treated some trees and they're going to treat more, but also thin it through there, do some understory planting, a lot of stuff like that. So it's I think probably it would have been. I think our approach with the gaps is a little bit better, but it is a campground, so you got to keep it looking nice. Can't go cut a whole bunch of gaps and patches and everything else through there. So
Ryan, I know we need to save a little more time for questions, but do you have one of those 3 slides where you started to do a little bit of economic analysis that you presented to the steering committee? As an illustration of the type of, we talked a lot about other values, but of the type of financial data that we're collecting, that's just mind-boggling, right?
So I don't actually. I did if I could have hooked my laptop up, but
All right.
basically, like, it's not to steal a quote from Irving when I worked there, but what gets measured gets managed. It's something every staff meeting you heard that. I think it was pasted on the wall at one point. But we're actually taking that approach with the projects. Like, we're looking at everything that we can possibly measure in these stands from, a forestry and biodiversity perspective for our research work, but then also, we track time for the harvesters right down to basically 15-minute interval. We know time, like how much time we spent on brushing, doing any work like that, and really just trying to quantify what it takes to do this type of harvesting. So, for anybody that was in Namaw River, we actually had a couple weeks of really good weather and everything, so we wouldn't have had to do a whole bunch of brushing work. Whereas, like I said, the first couple of sites we did were in the fall. It was fairly wet, and kind of spent a lot of time doing brushing work in there. I don't have the exact numbers for it, but just trying to quantify everything for that, and it's going to be really interesting to see. The first couple of sites that we've done have been, I just didn't have photos for. We also did an old field white spruce stand, which is, typically that was guaranteed to be clear cut. We did it as regular gaps there again. But interesting to see what the economics from stands like that, or especially when we get into, we've got a whole bunch of aspen stands that we want to work in. And right now, I don't know if you can even sell, we don't even know if we're going to bother trying to bring wood out of the woods from those ones, because really we don't have a market for it. And progress done silviculturally, we're wildly successful and we get it back on the pathway that we want. If we don't have either a market for that or really significant funding to go into those stands, there's something, you ask anybody that works in forestry in this room, even any landowner that deals with it on the woodlot, we all know that, but now we're going to prove it. It's going to be on paper, we've measured it all, and then it's just a lot easier when we go to government with asks or demands, or to tell them, like, look, we need help with this stuff, and this is why, and we can show them the research around it. So that's the whole idea with all the sites that we're doing.
There's also some really good policy implications here, right? We remain an advocacy organization, and so I've been saying, we can fail at some of the things we do, because then we can go to government and say, why are we allowing some of these stand conditions to even develop? Why are we putting a percentage of our forest in a condition that even well-intentioned people with a fairly large amount of money say it doesn't make any sense to even try to fix it. The best thing we can do is wash our hands of it. So there's, success isn't the only success we may have. Failure
Yeah.
may be a success in some ways.
And it's evolving too, I'd say, like we had our steering committee meeting this week too, and honestly don't know why we hadn't thought about it before. Greg Watson had the great point that, and I don't know how to measure, but we need to figure out a way to do it. He said, like, we really need to be looking at avoided costs through doing this type of harvesting work too. So it's not that it's prohibitively expensive to, like, it might be really expensive to work in those aspen stands, but how much is it gonna cost in silviculture investment if we clear cut it, go back, we gotta plant it, manual weed it, PCT it, and then honestly in those aspen sites, you take that approach, usually they fail anyway, because aspen just grows back so fast, you can't get what you want back in there, so it's a massive investment for not very much return, whereas with our, you know, if it's, easier to get the results we want on the silviculture side of things, we might financially actually be way further ahead by doing that type of work, so don't know how we're gonna quantify that yet, but, we'll, that's more something for Kevin, he's the brains around that type of stuff, right?
What Andy was saying about avoiding costs, avoiding these expensive silviculture treatments, which I think that working with a machine in those unmerchantable stands, tremendously expensive. We've dug ourselves a hole by not funding pre-commercial thinning properly or adequately for 30 years. And we continue to not fund it adequately.
Yep.
So always the first thing about when you're digging a hole, stop, dig in and fix, right? So that's something that we shouldn't forget to add to that today, is to improve the conditions and availability of funds in pre-commercial thinning,
Yeah.
the standard that would avoid what we're facing now.
Yeah, and I meant to talk about that some too, like with our restoration thinning work, even, like, we may not wanna wait that long, but especially with the machines, like, one of the big things with pre-commercial thinning is, like, we do it too early all the time. So these sites fail constantly because you get in there too early, you try and leave a bunch of red spruce or whatever, but if you've got white, gray birch, anything like that, it just suckers back so quick. Whereas if you can let them grow taller, it becomes harder to do it by hand, like with a brush saw or even with a chainsaw. That's actually really great stuff to be working in with the machines. And if we paid a little bit more for those and have a lot more sites actually succeed, the true cost, like, we don't actually know what the true cost of pre-commercial thinning is, because we don't actually look at it assessing, okay, well, this site was successful, but we spent the same amount on this one and it completely failed. If you looked at that, pre-commercial thinning is way over $2,000 a hectare, I think, because there's as many sites or more that failed than ones that are truly successful. So, you know, maybe it is, I mean, the best first step is to stop clear cutting so often, but we're gonna have to do a bunch of it anyway, just through hurricanes and everything else. But, you know, do we need to get back into that stand in 10 or 12 years? Why don't we wait 20 years and get into there? And sure, it slows your growth rate down, and it might cost a little bit more to treat it. But if you're treating a stand, and you could stand back and look and say, well, as long as nothing, we don't have any major disaster in there, that's actually gonna be a good stand again someday. And, you know, if it takes 10 or 15 years longer, but you have a really good, well-developed stand, then who cares, right? So, we talked about that a little bit in the woods on the Crown Day, like, you know, for the couple sites we've done, we've said, you know, $1,200 a hectare, which is a lot more than pre-commercial thinning. But these are on sites that haven't had planting, like I said, haven't had manual weeding, sprayed, PCT'd or anything, so that's one silviculture intervention. And we've got what's a reasonably good site there now. The one in Alma River, if you could ever come out and see it, I envision within 10 years time we're gonna be in there cutting all the balsam fir that we left out of it for studs and leaving more of this nice red spruce mixedwood stand behind with us. So, you know, a heavy investment, but if you go on the border of the backside of that stand, that site was site prepped and planted and then completely abandoned. So it was over $1,000 a hectare just to get that done, and it's nothing but a mess of red maple bumps. It's just a big, massive waste of money versus this one. You know, with the investment that we've made, I can already see the future of that stand, see that it's going to be a good stand going down the road. So, every PCT site looks really nice the year after it's done, but you gotta go back in 5 or 10 years and see if you're actually successful, so.
So with the data that is being collected, is this monetary column also being part of that as we go along? Or is this just something that we're thinking about on the side burner, as opposed to saying, okay, we're collecting data in so many different areas, but that could be probably a main lobbying aspect when it comes to keeping funding coming towards it, is be able to
Yeah.
prove that monetary aspect.
Honestly, the economic analysis, like at the end of the 5 years of the project, that's gonna be like the hard, concrete data that we have on the research and silviculture side. We'll know the economics of how much it costs to do that type of work in the current conditions. Silviculturally, we don't know how those stands are gonna respond, like that's a 10, 15, and then continuing on down the road type of research thing, like, that's what we need the FFN to be its own entity and keep going, like, to be able to look at that stuff, but the economics of it is gonna be good, concrete data that we have, that we can show to the government or the public or whoever wants to read it. That's kind of one of the main drivers for this.
We'll have very good data on current costs and some analysis of where that's taken us in relation to the natural development of those stands. And there's gonna be a very good follow-on project that should take in continued monitoring of all of these parcels over the long term, right? So it's gonna work both ways, I think. And the data itself, though, is, I don't know, I mean, Irving has data, I'm sure, that's very robust. I was telling him, I think before you showed up, but there isn't really any publicly available data that gets to, the heart of the issues of what can we afford to do and what can't we afford to do, right? And what do we mean by afford, and what are we getting from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's good research from some of the mills, even from government in the past, but like productivity and clear cut scenarios, and there used to be some around commercial thinning, that type of stuff, and yeah, like when I worked at the JDI, we did lots of time trials and commercial thinning work, but as far as I know, and they may be, or might be something on the horizon for them, but nothing looking at this type of work.
Yeah.
And especially not, like, we're always so focused on how productive are the harvesters and everything else, but one of the big ones that we're gonna get is, like I said, we do a lot of between plot measures, with our biodiversity, like we use MTRI to check our sites for biodiversity features and everything even beforehand. And we'll have good data on what it actually takes to properly plan and implement these types of harvests. And honestly, the harvesting side, the cost is really going to come down to having good markets for the products we want to sell. The extra added cost for this type of work really comes for, like myself and Kyle and Maggie be out there in the woods taking, we sample a lot more intensively than what they do on Crown land, and then also with tree marking, everything else like that. That's where it's going to be more cost, but it doesn't cost that much to have somebody just in the woods walking around for a day, right? So in the long run, what you gain by having a far better idea of what's going on there and a much better plan for how to get the results that you want, I don't think it's going to be a big cost in the long run.
So, back to your, the aspen and no markets, is there no biofuel, market for that kind of, tree, and given what you may answer, is that not where we should be doing more advocacy? I'm thinking back at the field day we had last year at the Western conference, the Woodlands conference, and the tour of University of St. Anne and their big biofuel generators there, so boilers. So is that not something that needs to be looked at?
That's not part of our mandate. We can't do anything with markets sort of stuff, but yeah, definitely, like, we know that we need the markets for that. I think Alistair, I think you were talking about it earlier, like, there is movement on that, but you just don't hear quite as much about it. Like, there's hopefully markets coming for mass timber type stuff, but also, I think I know that they just closed expression of interest or something like that around district heating plants for the new big hospital in Cape Breton and stuff, and it sounds like, I didn't actually read it, but talking to folks that did, it sounds like there's gonna be pretty strict measures around how that wood is sourced. It's gonna have to come from this type of harvesting. Like, you're not gonna be able to supply them with clear cut wood or anything like that, but you know, there's stuff I've heard rumblings or talked to a few, you know, folks with bigger farms or greenhouses and stuff around, can we get some smaller district heating plants? You know, the government put 6 of them in to a few buildings, like the school in Milford out by me has one, but they're all a drop in the bucket, but when you start adding a few here and a few there, it'll come. I don't know if folks, and I don't have any inside information on this, but they had the announcement the other day that there's a partnership now between Nova Scotia and Finland. I think a big part of that, and through talking to a few engineers, is the idea that we can lean on some of their expertise, because with a lot, like mass timber or district heating, a lot of the apprehension around that type of stuff is that our engineers that design projects here don't have any experience with that type of stuff, and they're rightfully so nervous to put their own stamp on a project that they've never actually designed and implemented. So can we lean on, you know, Finland? More than 50% of the heating in Finland comes from small district energy, like wood heat plants. So you know, they are the experts on that. So can we, yeah, like it'll be quiet, and then all at once I think you'll start to hear a whole bunch of these projects pop up. And honestly, in the long run, it's so much better. Like it's, you know, I saw the Premier come out this week and basically said, as far as he's concerned, Northern Pulp's not coming back. It'd be great to have a market for the wood, but I don't have any interest in another 600,000 ton single entity that buys my wood, that when they shut down it throws everything into chaos. I'm more interested that, you know, the boiler down the road that takes 10,000 tons, yeah, it's a big loss for 1 or 2 contractors, but it doesn't throw everything for a loop. For, you know, I started in the woods 16 or 17 years ago, and in my time, they thought Forward would close, and then they didn't, and then they did, and then New Page closed, and Sword opened back up, and Northern is gone, and yeah, kind of tired of that song and dance still. Yeah, Alistair.
Just to say that I think you can imagine a possible future. I don't know, it'll avoid your scenario, Ryan, where you've got like large customers for this kind of product. But like in a not too distant future, I think there's going to be a massive amount of competition for this product. There are more uses of it coming online than there is available fiber. And
Yeah.
so like there is a bit of a chicken or egg thing at the moment, where folks have to figure out what the landed cost of this material is, and that's why this is such valuable research work.
Yeah.
Because with that number in mind, then these projects can start to get off the ground.
Yeah, like there is, and I shouldn't say I don't want any, like, I'm
No,
fine with having a big.
I know what you mean,
Yeah, like, but you just don't want just the one thing that
Yeah.
kind of has control over everything, but yeah, like I mean, it's been in the news, the company that was looking at putting a biofuel plant in PEI is now thinking about divert. Ledridge has been off and on again, but something in their backyard there. There's, Irving's got more demand for softwood pulp, not for, like even out of Nova Scotia, because they've got this massive tissue plant that they've only got 2 or 4 lines open in Georgia, but a lot of their softwood pulp comes out of Atlantic Canada, and once they get up to 4 lines, I think you'll see them buy a lot more pulpwood in Nova Scotia, ship it by rail to St. John, and then by boat down to Georgia too. So there's all kinds of things like that, and then like I say, a bunch of smaller projects too, but nothing's concrete yet, but I think it'll come. But you know, no matter what, they're all a few years down the road. And also there's the new, I don't know if folks saw the new Fiona challenge. They got $7 or $8 million more around that, and that's entirely meant to try and spur some of this innovation. I was with Dave Sutherland from ASF the other day, who was overseeing it, and he said they've got some really good proposals in already for maybe not shovel-ready projects, but ones that probably won't take as long as you think. So I think there's some movement on it, but I don't know. I'll be apprehensive about it until it happens. So, Megan?
I'm curious, when you want to move a lot of the more softwood stands to more mixed wood condition, certainly one thing we notice a heck of a lot of, I'm sure it's not just Lunenburg County, is the effect of deer browsing
Yeah.
and on hardwood regeneration, and I'm wondering how you guys, what you're thinking about it in terms of dealing with that. That was my first question, and I was kind of wondering if that was also connected to like the fact that The sugar maple not growing because the soil isn't fertile enough for the sugar maple, or maybe it has something to do with deer browsing. Like, is there an actual experimental trial showing that in the
Yeah,
same area?
I don't know, like, that would be one fun to look at, cause you could just do deer exposures, like, you know, done them, you see they prove that in the islands with the moose and stuff, did the moose exposures, but, I know Kevin's thinking on it, especially with the sugar maples, a lot of it has to do with soils, but then also definitely deer browse. And for us on that one, and especially as much as we could lean on with the thriving forest, we'll try and plant some trees back. It's not gonna be full planting sites or anything with hardwoods, but you can imagine in the gaps like these ones, we might go through there and plant just 4 or 5 more advanced yellow birch, put in full tree tubes, like protective tubes and everything, but that gets expensive. That's $7-8 a tree, right? So you can't afford to do a whole bunch of that. We thought a little bit, especially if we could do some site prep work, do we do a little bit of that enrichment planting and maybe broadcast seed too? But the biggest problem for us right now, at least, I guess maybe more on the tolerant hardwood side, is there's such a seed shortage. Even for the nurseries, do we want to take a whole bunch of seed and just throw it around the woods, not knowing if it's going to grow or not, when the nurseries need it to actually grow seedlings? So, yeah, it's something on our radar. We don't know for sure what we're going to do, because we honestly don't know. Maybe these sites do regenerate better than what we thought they would. So it's yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
I was reading something interesting a few months ago about the Quabbin Reservoir, part of the forested land that provides the water supply area for Boston.
Yeah.
And they actually have, in order to encourage regeneration, they have targeted removal of deer.
Oh yeah.
To very much like to encourage the hardwood beetle.
I spent a bunch of time planting oaks there last year. None of them survived because the deer just chewed everything off. Like they'll, we're to the point even with our, because these are crop fields, they won't plant soy or corn or anything like that anymore. Most of it is alfalfa just because deer browse pressure is so high. So it's yeah, it's a big issue, and that is one of the ways that they can, you know, if you're so inclined that you can try to do it is to thin the herd a little bit.
Other people probably have questions, but I do have something related to this, and that is I'm wondering, with climate change and with, I just wonder if you guys discuss assisted migration of any species, and I'm curious, like, you know, we
haven't
about
talked
that.
specifically about it yet, but like
Hold that question. We're
Yeah,
gonna,
sure, okay.
I'm gonna give you 5 minutes, and we get the heck out of here. How's
Okay,
that?
okay.
Okay.
It's kind of sad to shut down what is going on here. This is pretty impressive, really. We're already over half an hour after we told you, and I think we should move on